Hey, it's Elizabeth D'Alto, and this is the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untame the Wild Soul is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. What's up, wild ones? Welcome to episode number 187 of the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. I am your host, Elizabeth D'Alto, and before we dive into today's show, I want to let you know that the Wild Soul Toolkit is coming. Super excited about this. It's something I've actually been beta testing since June of this year, so for a couple months now, and it was inspired by people's reactions and responses to our meditations, to our rituals, and to our guided practices that we put out sometimes. One of the things I noticed is that people are wanting more ways to connect with themselves on a daily basis in particular situations, whether it's deciding what to eat and really tuning into your body to know how to nourish yourself, or whether it's grounding yourself and getting present during hectic times in your life. For some people, they're interested in new moon and full moon rituals, or starting new endeavors with intention, or completing things, closing out the energy, blessing the situation, really integrating and appreciating the lessons that they learned and what came out of things. So I've put together 12 guided practices, rituals, and meditations into a Wild Soul Toolkit for you. It'll be coming out later this week or early next week. We're super excited to make this offering. It's not a program. It's literally just a toolkit you can grab for whatever practice, whatever ritual you need, whenever you need it. We have meditations to connect to your wild soul, meditations for divine protection, which is especially awesome for those of you who are energetically sensitive or identify as empaths. So keep an eye out for that. We'll give you a link when it's ready. Make sure that you are subscribed at wildsoulmovement.com. When you enter your name and email over there, you will be on the list to get the heads up as soon as the Wild Soul Toolkit is available. So keep an eye out for that. Now for today's show. Light Watkins is a former fashion model turned meditation teacher. He was raised in the South, has lived in New York City, currently resides in Los Angeles, and has traveled extensively. So Light brings a ton of perspective from a wealth of experience in a super calm, direct, and grounded way. So relax and enjoy this interview. We talk about different forms of meditation and which ones work best for which people. Light walked me through some really interesting scientific facts about meditation. And don't worry, we didn't get too technical. And what the 4 catalysts for distress are. We got into boredom, connection, and happiness. And he shared a really awesome story of a trip he took to Paris many years ago that was filled with synchronicity, which I know is a fan favorite here on the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. So we're going to get into this episode. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. If you want to check out the show notes, it'll be at untameyourself.com/episode-187. All right, welcome to the show, Light Watkins. I'm super pumped to have someone talk specifically. I know you work so much, you do so much around meditation, you run these super cool events and retreats and things, and we have so many women on the show who do stuff like that, but not a lot of dudes. So I'm excited to dive in from that perspective. So our first question for our men is always, what do you love about being a man?
Being able to pee anywhere without big production.
They make things now so women can do that. Do you know this?
No. What is that?
It's like, I don't remember the name of it. I think there's a couple different, but it's basically for people who camp or go to Burning Man, where like, I don't know, you just put something and it like is a tool and it creates a stream so women can do it too.
Wow. That's cool. Well, then that's great.
I haven't tried it. So tell us, I have a lot of people on the show who are like friends of mine who I already know them super well, and I don't really dive into the story, but because I don't know anything about you other than what I've read on your website, I'd love to know a bit of the origin story. So how did you get into meditation to begin with?
I had been dabbling in meditation for years, living in New York City. I was working as a fashion model at the time. and I started taking yoga classes. And this is back in the mid 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And so back then, I only took yoga in my gym, but they had really really good yoga teachers. It wasn't like it is today, where anyone and their mother can be a yoga teacher, and they
Right.
you take some 3-week training to become a yoga teacher. Back then, people were actually like proper yogis, and they weren't playing music, and it was all very kind of serious. But I kind of liked that. I liked how much reverence they had for the practice. So we would oftentimes meditate in yoga classes, and I didn't know anything about it, but I knew that it was something that I should probably do. And so I just started trying different styles and experimenting, going to different places, meditating, meeting different teachers. And again, it was slim pickings. There weren't a lot of offerings that I could find outside of like really intense religious environments, really intense Buddhist environments or Zen environments, that kind of thing. So I just kept trying and dabbling, and I didn't really enjoy it all that much. And then I moved to Los Angeles when I was near the end of my modeling career. And about 3 months after I moved to Los Angeles, I met a Transcendental Meditation teacher who taught me TM, and that's what changed everything. It was literally like, it was like working in a coal mine, and then I got recruited by some Wall Street hedge fund. That's what it felt like. I went from blue collar work in meditation, rolling up my sleeves, and it was so hard, to this kind of white collar desk job where I was getting so many benefits and not hardly having to do any work.
All right. This is a really interesting metaphor. So tell me, I've heard of Transcendental Meditation, never tried it. I've never done it. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. So what makes it distinct from all the other forms of meditation is the fact that it is intended for householders. And this is something that I didn't really know at the time, is that there's a difference in the meditation styles. There's some styles that are suited for householders, which are people of the world, people with jobs and relationships. And then there are styles that are better suited for monastic types of people. And most of what we consider proper classic meditation in the West, that's a big cup. Most of what we consider proper meditation in the West are monastic traditions. And there's only really a few householder traditions. So TM is probably the most popular one. It's not the only one, but it's probably the most popular one. And it's very much a brand and an organization. But the method of meditation that they teach is actually known to be very, very ancient.
So I like this because one of the things that I talk about a lot in the context of any type of embodiment, spiritual development, personal, whatever, self-help, whatever people are doing, is we live in a really complex time. Mm-hmm. And I find people's number one objection to doing anything is I don't have time, or, I can't quiet my thoughts, or whatever, all these things. And so I'm always looking for things that are it makes sense. You get enormous benefits. It's not like you have to be a monk or go to an ashram or do these other things. And so that distinction that you've explained between a householder or a monk, I find probably people who struggle to meditate and do things are trying to assimilate something that is better suited for monks or that kind of lifestyle into complex 21st century living.
Yeah, the analogy that I have used before, and that I have a book coming out on all of this, and it's one that I think it really accurately describes it. It's kind of like if you want to be a casual jogger, but you adopt the training regimen and the diet program of Usain Bolt or some Olympian champion. It's not necessary. And I think a lot of people, when they want to just sincerely have a casual meditation practice, most of what's out there are telling people to adopt the monastic tradition, which is basically, this really extreme, austere, intense thing. and they don't have the time to dedicate, to it. They end up walking away from the experience thinking meditation is not for me, or my mind won't let me meditate, or all these other silly excuses, which are just that. They're silly excuses. And it's really coming from a lot of misinformation out there by people who don't even really know what they're talking about. It's a lot. And I don't mean this in an arrogant way, but in general, since anyone can technically wake up in the morning and call themselves a meditation teacher or a mindfulness coach, because there's no certification, there's no standardization, so anyone can say it. And yet very few people have been properly or thoroughly trained, or have studied or apprenticed or mentored with a teacher for a significant amount of time, or have been to India, or any of the standard qualifications that someone who is in the know typically has. Then there could be a lot of misinformation out there. And so it's meditation right now. It's kind of like the wild west, where it's largely the blind leading the blind, and the people with the best platforms and the best marketing strategies are usually the ones with the loudest voices, but they're not necessarily the ones who know what they're talking about. So
yeah, we've talked about this in other episodes, where there are a lot of people these days, especially with like the online landscape the way it is, who are masters of sales and marketing and not necessarily their craft. So, yes. And I know, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, experience. You've used the word now twice, proper. So I want to dive into that for a second, because you said something about proper yogis, which I wrote down. I loved that you mentioned the reverence. And with meditation teachers or mindfulness, you just mentioned various kinds of training and stuff like that. Now that you're in LA, and I know this is like a rampant environment for such things, can we talk about that reverence piece? Because this is something I do my best not to judge people, but one of the things that triggers me for sure is when people are out and about talking about certain things that I deem as sacred, but big lack of reverence. Do you see that too? Is this just me being a judgy bitch or what?
Well, what do you mean by lack of reverence when you say that?
So
what's an example?
I'm a real like right brain feeler type of sensitive person. So give me a second to articulate it, because it's more of like a felt sense, like lack of reverence, lack of embodiment, lack of respect, lack of humbleness, humility, and probably appreciation as well for the practice, for the lineage, for that it probably is ancient. It comes from somewhere.
Right.
There's origins to it.
It's interesting you bring that up, because there's a lot of, a lot in the news recently, and I don't want to date this conversation too much, but, we're talking a lot about white privilege and, the whole thing with white supremacy. And, that's a very mild, socially accepted form of that kind of privilege, because a lot of these people you're referring to and that I've seen are basically white people who have that kind of colonizer's mentality of, we discovered this thing and now it's ours and we own it. And, it didn't really have any value until we came across it, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm having like the litany of people flash across my mind. We don't need to do that. But, and I think sometimes there's that. And then there's like the don't know what you don't know. Because like I have a practice called Wild Soul Movement. And when I was creating it, it was literally like I was putting things together. I was synthesizing things that I had learned. In some cases, I probably overly attribute. Like it's many, many years later. And there's still this one thing I say during class. And I'm like, I learned this from my friend Rochelle. Or like, I'm a real geek about that. But there's also things that I had no idea they were elements of things that already exist. Like Kundalini yoga or somatic experiencing. So it's why I try to hold back my judgment, because I myself have created things where I didn't know elements of it. Certainly had origins long beyond I had thought of something, but I didn't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And now, now that yoga's kind of become was reached a point of saturation for the most part. When you think about, yoga and the people associated with being the top teachers of yoga, you don't really think a whole lot about Indian teachers.
Right.
You think about, I could name, the white teachers, but, we're not talking a lot about Iyengar, about Patabi Joyce, Jessica Char, the guys who were the sort of the proponents of that tradition that first introduced it to the West. But that's been a part of Western culture since it has existed. Imperialism and it's just co-opting these ideas as their own, and so the same thing is probably going to be happening with meditation, and that is going to be perpetuated through the marketing. But that's just how things go, and I get what you're saying about reverence, and I think that it is important to acknowledge that this comes from somewhere. And the more people travel, and especially if you go to places like India, it becomes pretty apparent that practices like yoga and meditation aren't just these kind of surface level experiences that happen on yoga mats and with Lululemon pants on, but it's so deeply ingrained in the culture to the point where people don't even really do asana yoga, which is, I think, shocking for a lot of Westerners. Is that if you go to a yoga class in India, it's more or less a tourist attraction. Indians aren't in their living rooms with a yoga mat doing downward facing dog. They have a deeper, more reverent experience with their spiritual connection, and to the point where they have altars everywhere. They have it in their car. They have it in their retail shops. They have it in they have it with them. They stop in the temples. There are more temples in India than there are gas stations in America, because people are always pulling over to get a little reboot and to express, gratitude and to strengthen their connection with something greater than themselves. And that's a really beautiful thing to witness. So it is kind of challenging when you see what's happening here with marketing, but the true gurus, you have to embrace that as well. That has to be a part of the picture as well, because there is some value to it. And in a large sense, it's introducing people to these practices and traditions, people who otherwise probably would not have even considered checking out yoga or meditation or using an app or whatever their on-ramp is to those practices.
Yeah, I ultimately, once I'm able to move beyond my judgments sometimes, or my triggers, right? Human. I'm not an ascended master guru or anything of the sort. I'm just glad people are being bridged into a better connection with themselves, or a connection to something beyond themselves. And that's hopefully helping us show up as better humans in the world and connect with our sensitivities and things. So I'm curious, so what changed for you? You said you had done a bunch of different types of meditation. You found TM. Sounds like this is the thing. Is this a daily practice? More than daily? You do it when you need it. What's your practice like? And how is your life different because that is your practice?
I have been practicing this thing pretty consistently since I learned it. And it's really been the only thing I've ever done as consistently in my whole life. I'm going on 15 years now of daily practice. And it took me probably a year to get to the point where I was not missing hardly any meditations. But I wake up in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, usually do my first meditation of 20 minutes. And then I do my second meditation around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I do that like clockwork every single day. And, for me, meditation is this really enjoyable activity that I look forward to as much as, I don't know if you remember when the show Breaking Bad was out. It's really the only show that I would binge watch and make sure that I was available for when it came out. But I would wake up on Sunday mornings, because it would come on Sunday evenings, and I would think about my day, and I literally would plan my whole day around watching Breaking Bad. So if there's anything coming, it had to be really important for me to miss Breaking Bad if something was happening on Sunday evening. And it's no exaggeration to say that I feel that that same level of enthusiasm around my meditation practice. So it's not a thing where, I feel like, oh, I should be meditating. Kind of like I feel when like every night I go through this debate about flossing my teeth. Like, do I want to do it? Should do it.
It's just not what I was expecting.
I've gotten like $10,000 worth of dental work in my life. I've got every procedure done, and it's like if I don't floss my teeth, I'm probably going to wake up. It's like even despite the fact that I've had spent all that money and time and energy on my teeth, I still go through that debate around, do I have time to floss my teeth? Because it's just a hassle. It's a hassle.
And it takes a minute.
It takes a minute. And and
Why
I'm always
are we so weird as humans? Why do we do that stuff?
I'm always happy that I did it after I did it, but there's like 5 minutes as I'm getting ready for bed where I'm just like, oh God, maybe I'll just skip it this one time. And then I remember like, oh no, I had some, a power bar earlier. That stuff is probably in the middle of my teeth right now. I got to get it out. So, but that is never a conversation with meditation. And I think a lot of people experience meditation kind of like how I experienced flossing my teeth. Like they know they should do it, but they just don't. And even though it may only take 10 or 15 minutes, they convince themselves that they don't have the time to do it. And when I hear that, all that means to me, the way I interpret that is you don't enjoy it. And the reason you don't enjoy it is probably because you're doing it like a monk. And if you just did it like a householder was intended to meditate, you would not only enjoy it, but you would crave it. You would look forward to it. And I almost feel guilty because I know that most people don't experience meditation like that. And it's not hard to do. So that was one of the driving forces behind me becoming a teacher of meditation. So I really wanted to share the knowledge around how easy it could be, and help other people discover that for themselves. Because you asked me what changed since I've been meditating. There's so much. I mean, meditation is really one of those key habits that positively influences almost every aspect of your life. It's right up there with sleep, right? Like, for instance, if you couldn't sleep, and a lot of people are in that situation as well, unfortunately, they can't sleep at night. There's not one area of life that's not going to be negatively affected by the fact that you're not sleeping. You're going to be gaining more weight. You're going to be craving sugary and fatty foods. You're going to be getting into stupid arguments and confrontations. You're going to be losing your patience. You're not going to be able to be as compassionate and as generous as you want to be. Your skin is going to start breaking out. Your hair may start falling out. All these different things that are typically related to, oh, you're just not resting enough, or you're too stressed. There's not just one area of life that gets affected by that. So the meditation is kind of the same. And what the meditation is doing is it's resupplying the body with rest. So that's why I say it's in the same category with sleeping. So that when you start getting that supplemental rest from the meditation, the first thing people typically notice is they start sleeping better. And that was my experience. Now, I was already a good sleeper, but there's a difference in sleeping uninterrupted and getting a higher quality of rest, right? The way you're getting a higher quality of rest is that you don't need the 7-8 hours that they say you need to have in order to function optimally. You may get 6 hours of sleep, but you feel like you got 8 hours of sleep because you got a higher quality of rest. Some people can sleep for 10 hours and wake up feeling completely exhausted, like sleep didn't work, right? That's a classic symptom of sleep deprivation. They have too much cortisol in their bloodstream. So meditation, and I didn't, when I first started doing this, I didn't understand like the biology of it, but there's a lot of, very, very logical, biological connections related to these sorts of outcomes that we can go into if you want to.
I do. There. Can we? Because science is not really my jam. So whenever it is someone's, I'm like, give us the details that I'm never going to research and be the fountain of myself.
Well, one of the things that I kind of pride myself on is, I kind of have a layman's understanding of these kinds of subjects. I'm not a biologist, I'm not a physiologist. I don't profess to be one. I don't care to be one. But I've done enough research and enough studying to understand like the gist, the broad strokes of this stuff in a way that helps me communicate it to other people as simply as possible. Because most people aren't going to remember these things either. But generally speaking, the reason why we don't sleep well at night is because our hormones are off, and the hormones get thrown off because of stress accumulation. So when we think about stress, most people think about stress in terms of a thing, a person, a place, a circumstance, a demand, a pressure, a change of expectation. Something happened to me, and that caused me to feel stressed. And it's kind of a mistaken source for the stress. The stress is not really the thing that happened to you. The stress is your reaction to it. Like you were saying earlier, the thing that triggers me. So that trigger is an internal mechanism that basically it indicates that we are either overreacting or maladapting to a given demand, pressure, circumstance, experience, person, situation. And so when we overreact, the way the body knows we're overreacting is based on our emotions. So we have emotions which lead to a feeling of distress, right? Typically fear, sadness, anger, and boredom. So anytime we feel those emotions, our body hormonally starts to prepare itself for running and fighting. In other words, we start becoming the Incredible Hulk inside. We get superhuman strength to fight, and we get cheetah-like ability to run fast. And now this is a relic from the 10,000-year-old human Homo sapien model of living out in the elements and having to sometimes fight off warring tribes or run away from literal predators who were chasing us for food. And so the people in our human history who were the fastest to react to danger were the ones who typically survived. So we are the beneficiaries of the survival mechanism and of the highest order. The people who we have inherited the genes from the humans who were the fastest to react and the strongest. So the problem is nowadays, how many times do we know of anyone in our life who's ever been attacked by a four-legged predator or, a warring tribe or, these kinds of things that were happening, famine, these kinds of things that were happening 10,000, 20,000 years ago? Very, very rarely. Most of the things that we're feeling sad about or afraid of or angry about are things that are happening at work, things that are happening in personal relationships. It's little things. Somebody didn't text us back fast enough. There's not enough gas in the car. Somebody didn't fill up the car. I dropped my phone, the screen cracked. I ordered a Big Mac and they put in a quarter pounder instead, that kind of stuff. And now I'm back home and I really wanted the Big Mac. So those little things, well, if we keep having these little reactions and getting triggered, they start to accumulate. And so hormonally, what's happening inside of the body is our cortisol levels, which is a primary stress chemical, and our adrenaline levels are starting to go up. And if it keeps happening on a daily basis, or for some people on an hourly basis, then the body has its own sort of algorithm, kind of like how Google has an algorithm and Facebook has an algorithm, where it starts to show you what you're interested in based on your history. So if your history is being angry or being sad or being afraid of things, and that keeps happening over and over, the body's very efficient. It's wasted energy to keep going into this stress reaction and coming back out of it and going back in a second later and coming back out and going back in an hour later and coming back out. So eventually the body's going to say, well, it's way more efficient to just stay in it all the time. Mm-hmm. And so one day we wake up, we have some reaction, and the body just never comes out of it. And that's where we start seeing the physical manifestations, which is I can't sleep at night, or I have high blood pressure, or I have joint pains, or I have diabetes, or I have Alzheimer's, All these different diseases and illnesses are now known to be adult onset, meaning they're not genetic, or if they were genetic, they could have been altered with lifestyle changes and behaviors. But because we inherited the same type of lifestyle as our parents or grandparents, which may be sedentary lifestyles, not doing much, being too comfortable, not exercising, eating poorly, engaging in bad relationships, becoming alcoholics, things like that, then the genetic hardwiring just continues perpetuating. And we end up with the same sorts of illnesses and diseases as our ancestors. And on top of that, we have this whole new set of hardwiring in the body and in the mind, which causes the cortisol to just stay in the bloodstream in a concentrated amount. So now we've gone out to the Tempur-Pedic mattress place. We spent $4,000 buying this wonderful mattress. We have blackout curtains. We have lavender we spread on our pillows. We go to bed at night and we're sitting there lying there in the bed, wishing we could sleep, hoping we could sleep. We've read all the sleep books. We've taken sleep courses, but nothing's really happening. And the reason nothing is happening is not because the sleep course doesn't work or the bed doesn't work. It's because cortisol's job is to keep us stimulated. It's to keep you aware enough so that you can run away from the cheetah. And it wouldn't be doing its job if it wasn't keeping you stimulated. So people end up tossing and turning all night and then, waking up tired, which makes them even less susceptible to adapting to change that next day, which it creates a snowball effect.
Yeah.
So the reason why, or one of the reasons why meditation biologically has a positive effect on the nervous system is because it is one of the very few interventions that can override the stress chemistry. In fact, the chemicals that saturate the body when you sit down and close your eyes and interrupt the normal thinking process, those chemicals have a dissolving effect on the stress chemicals. So it's all chemicals, right? And these chemicals for meditation can get in there and just root out the stress chemicals, hormonally speaking, because all hormones are messengers to the cells, telling the cell how to process this information. And it basically tells the body, look, the danger's over, the fire's put out, no one's chasing you, you can relax now. And so when you meditate in this way, a lot of times your body can even rest deeper than it can rest while you're sleeping. That's why that statistic exists, is because most people aren't sleeping that well. But when they get a chance to meditate, when I say meditation, in that sense, I'm talking about a seated, eyes closed practice, not, my biking is meditation or crocheting is meditation and all of that. Those can be meditative, meaning that you're not thinking about what's going on in the future or the past, but they're not giving you the same sort of biological changes as a seated, eyes closed practice, and particularly one where you have an opportunity to interrupt the thinking process. And this is what TM is kind of famous for. Is the reason they call it transcendental meditation is because you're learning how to transcend or go beyond your busy mind in a very effective way. And you can even reach a point where you're really not having many thoughts at all, which is, again, it's a very unusual thing to imagine for most casual meditators who have been kind of doing the do-it-yourself approach that I was doing when I first started out. And you just feel like, oh, my mind is just becoming even busier. Mm-hmm. And that's because, the mind can feel very tricky if you don't really know how to operate in concert with it while you're meditating. So that's what you learn over the course of 4 or 5 days in TM. Is a very thorough, comprehensive set of instructions where you're basically learning how to use your mind to meditate. And it gets very specific, in relation to why you're having these thoughts as opposed to those thoughts, and what to do about this, and what happens when you fall asleep, and how do you track the time in a way that doesn't pull you out of the experience, and how do you sit? What is the best angle for sitting so that you can elicit the deepest results, and that kind of thing. It's kind of like a college course for meditation for regular people.
I love this because that is actually one of the things. When I meditate, I have such a desire, meditation and sleep. I actually, we use our freaking phones for everything. The phone is the alarm, the phone is this. And even when I go on walks or to the beach or something, I keep meaning to, and I haven't done it, kind of like the flossing of the teeth, to get a watch, to get an alarm clock so I can not have to have the phone out. So to track the time, what you just said, without having to interrupt the meditation is a thing. Because I know we have these countdown timers, or I used to have this meditation app on my phone called Equanimity, and you could set it to like beep. So it kind of lets you know that like, okay, you're going for 15 minutes, you're at the 5 minute mark and stuff like that. That doesn't take you totally out of the thing. But my desire is always to be like, cool, but do I have to have my phone? Because even just having the phone around is a trigger. It's a connection to like the outside world.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept where a lot of people are now with apps using technology to disconnect from technology.
Silly.
And I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening that are very counterintuitive with meditation. And, I mean, it's, again, but at the same time, I'm happy that there are apps that are out there, because without those apps, a lot of people wouldn't be doing anything. And I think that you can find any level of experience you want to have with meditation. And the people who eventually get to the point where they want to take it more seriously because they realize that the time I'm spending doing this is the equalizer. Like, everybody has the same 24 hours of the day. So, if I'm going to spend time doing this, I want to get the most out of that time. I want to learn how to become the most efficient with that time so that I can maximize it. And then it can help to elevate all the other time that I'm spending doing everything else in my day. Yeah. Instead of coming out of it feeling shortchanged or feeling like it didn't work and that kind of thing. There's only so much of that you can do before you either give up or you take it to the next level.
Right.
So there's a lane for every level in the meditation. Yeah. I would be, what I do is I'm probably in the more premium lane, for people. I'm not cheap, and it takes time, and it's not scalable. It's very like one-on-one and personal, but it's very effective. And the people who I train end up being very successful in their practice. And the way I define success is in how I experience it, which is you wake up in the morning and you can't wait to meditate.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, so there are lots of different really fascinating connections between the biochemistry of meditation and the health benefits that we're all reading about now, with less heart disease, less cancer, less depression, less anxiety, better sleep. It's not just some magical silver bullet that can't be explained. It's very real science that can show pretty obviously that there's an undeniable connection between lack of sleep and high blood pressure and anxiety, and an intake of stress. And the opposite is also true. When you get rid of the stress, then the body has a tendency to bounce back to its factory setting, which is usually where we have better health experiences and don't get sick as often.
So you said something when you were talking about like 4 core emotions. You said anger, sadness, fear, boredom. I'm curious about boredom because literally just yesterday, a friend of mine, most of my friends are entrepreneurs, and a friend of mine had posted something on Facebook like, does anyone else feel like the most boring person in the world when someone asks you, what do you do outside of work?
Yeah.
And there's, all these comments from other entrepreneurs being like, yeah, totally. What's the difference? Blah, blah, blah. And I just wrote, no, like, I just don't feel bored. Like, that's not really something, just very rare, even in my whole life. Like, I'm always entertained or like enthralled by something. Like, there's always something to do or something to read or whatever. So the idea of boredom is so fascinating to me because it's just not something I have a lot of experience with. So what's the connection between meditation and boredom?
Well, boredom is what you're referring to are the 4 catalysts for distress, and the reason boredom is in there, and again, boredom is one of those catch-all terms for any situation where you're not stimulated, you're not interested, you're not curious. But, if we want to just kind of take it, we want to extrapolate that, you think about situations like solitary confinement. Like imagine if you were confined by yourself in isolation for long stretches of time. That
I
drives
watch
people
some
crazy.
prison shows. I've thought about that. I'm like,
Yeah.
what would I actually do?
Right. So there's not technically, anything that can harm you in a room by yourself. But if it's a white room with no windows and it's just you in there, you can go crazy. It's a major stressor, is that sense of isolation. So
Right.
I think in meditation, it really is referring to a sense of isolation.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a connection. You can't feel a connection. You feel like you're by yourself. You feel very much separated. And that can cause people to kind of to lose it.
Got it. So are you more of how you experience more connection? Are you more introverted, extroverted? Do you spend a lot of time on your own? Are you around people a lot?
Well, that's interesting. Connection, there's obviously, again, different levels of connection in the same way that there are different levels of happiness, right? Happiness can be experienced because you had a nice thing happen to you at one moment in your day. But that level of happiness is very fleeting. It comes and it goes. And now what, a lot of scientists are talking about is that we all have a set point, a happiness set point, which means that no matter what happens to you, whether it's the worst thing ever or the best thing ever, after about 2 or 3 months, you're going to return to your happiness set point, wherever you were before the thing happened. So if you're a miserable person and you spend most of your time in misery and you win $100 million in the lottery one day, then scientifically speaking, statistically speaking, after about 3 months from that moment, you're going to be back in your miserable self. And if you are the most jovial, happy, curious, interested person in the world, and you get into an accident where you become a paraplegic, after about 3 months, statistically speaking, you're going to be returned to your jovial nature. You'll be a jovial paraplegic.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it's very fascinating. So connection is kind of the same thing. And this is not something that can necessarily be studied in science, but from what I've seen in my own direct experiences with meditation is, connection can happen because you're around people and you feel connected. But then when those people aren't there, you don't feel connected. And so you crave being around people. And we all know people like this. Maybe we're like this some of the time as well. True connection is a sensation that we can feel inside. Mm. And if you can feel that sense of connection inside, you can be anywhere. You can be in a dentist's office. You can be in traffic. You can be in the post office. You can be in nature. You can be, you can be isolated. You can be in solitary confinement. And you feel a sense of connection with everything that's around you. So you never really feel alone.
Yeah. I love this. I did a lot of traveling earlier in the year and I had that experience. It was almost like, I didn't realize this, but I kind of was testing myself. You do all these practices for all these years and then you're like, let's put the rubber on the road outside of my normal comfort zone. And I was in Europe for 5 weeks. And part of what I was so excited about was to be in a place where I didn't speak the language, where I wasn't in the majority, where I wasn't, I was in unfamiliar territory and things like that. And that connection, finding that, okay, I'm in a new place. I don't know a single human. I don't even speak the language. How am I experiencing connection? It was a really fun experiment. I didn't even realize when I went, it was one of those trips. Do you ever do these things? You're like, I don't really know why I'm doing this. I'm just going to go do it because I feel pulled to do it. And then you get there and you're like, there's like a million reasons why I'm doing this. That was one of them.
It's a good feeling, isn't it?
Yeah. Super cool. So tell us about, keep going.
No, I've had that feeling before too, taking trips. I went through a phase where every year I would take a trip somewhere where I didn't speak the language, I didn't know anyone, and I wouldn't make any plans. And I would just get a one-way ticket and I would just show up.
Yeah.
And see what happens. And I've had some of the most amazing adventures from doing that because it kind of forces you to be present. You don't have a choice other than just being present and feeling a connection with everyone and everything that you're around. And when you have that, you normally see that, you know what, I'm never really alone. I always have what I need. All my needs are usually met. I just have to be open to it. And I think
Yes.
that's where a lot of people feel stuck, is they're not getting what they want, but that's because they have an expectation of how it should show up.
Yeah.
And really, if we wanted to get into sort of the esoteric or metaphysical realms of it, the universe or nature's intelligence or big baby Jesus, whatever you want to call it, has its own plan for each one of us. And when we can just surrender to what is in this moment, we're more available to see and hear and feel the still small voice within that's always guiding us in the direction of that plan, very much like our GPS guides us in our car. It knows the destination very clearly, and it will keep giving us reroutes and everything we need in order to keep making our way to that destination.
It's so good. This is how I ended up in this place in Malibu. My lease in San Diego is still going on for like another 6 weeks. Like I was planning on moving at the end of September. At the time your interview will go up at the end of August. So for people listening in real time, this is going up on Monday, August 28th. And so awesome. I will have been in my place here in Malibu for 2 weeks, whereas I wasn't planning on moving for another month from now. But all these things started happening. And like you were saying, the surrender is a big part of Wild Soul movement, of what I teach. And all these things started happening. And I was like, I think I'm going there now. And, there's all these other question marks, like maybe I'm paying rent on 2 places in September. It'll just work itself out. And it's kind of like the adventure and staying in the curiosity of like, I don't know why, right? Like I'm talking to my mom and she's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, don't even worry about it. Like if you try to get me to tell you why this makes sense, I'm not going to be able to. But probably many months from now, I'll look back and I'll be like, that's why I had to do that thing.
That's right. Steve Jobs said famously that you can't see the dots connecting in front of you. You can only see them looking back. So don't even try to find the connections in the moment. Just do what feels right in the moment. Listen to your heart and everything's going to work out.
Oh my God. That one gave me a big chill. Like try to find the connections in the moment. I think of how many times I have probably wasted so much time processing, analyzing, trying to make meaning in the moment, and probably just missing amazing things that were right in front of my face because I was like looking for stuff that I couldn't possibly access then. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where was your favorite place, if you have a favorite, or top couple, if you can't narrow it down, that you took one of those adventure trips to, of just showing up and seeing what happened?
They've all been special for different reasons because I went in different times of my life. But one of the first times I did it, which was when I went to Paris, about a one-way ticket to Paris, not knowing anyone, not speaking the language. And it's a funny story, but I'll just try to make it brief. I arrived in Newark, New Jersey for the transfer to Charles de Gaulle Airport. And it was a really packed flight. And they ended up, this is back in the 90s. No one was getting dragged off of airplanes back then. But they offered to give a voucher in exchange for your seat. So I gave up my seat and I got I think it was a $400 flight voucher, which was great because I didn't even have money to get back. I was just going, I literally spent all the money I had on my ticket to go over there.
That's
so
cool.
So now I had enough money to come back.
That worked out nicely.
Exactly. It worked out beautifully. And then the next day I went back to the airport because there was only one flight a day going to Paris from Newark on the airline. And same thing happened. And I gave up my seat again and I got another $400 voucher. So now.
Did you ever go to Paris?
I know. I thought I could just do this for a living. This is great. This is awesome. Because the great thing about it is no one was expecting me. Right? I told my mom, I said, oh yeah, they're calling for me over there. I have a job. Everything's lined up. Don't worry about it. Meanwhile, nobody was expecting me. I had nothing lined up. This is before like the internet. So I had a Paris on the cheap or Paris on a budget book or something like that. They gave me the list of cheap places to try to stay. And that's it. There was no cell phones, there was none of that. I may have had a pager. I don't remember, but yeah, this is, I mean, things seem so accessible and easy now. And I'm sounding like an old person, even though I'm not really that old. But it was just at that time, just before the internet age. So I get over. So the third day I went there, and same thing happened, except this time I was like the last person. There was one seat, so I had to take the trip. And I ended up in the middle of Paris, and I went to see about getting a job at this ad agency. And I went to it, and they kind of politely turned me away. And this guy who was in there, he was looking at me. He was speaking French to these other two guys. Then he walks over to me. He speaks in perfect American accent. Aren't you from Chicago? And I said, yeah. I mean, I was living in Chicago right before then. And he says, oh, did they end up accepting you? And I said, no. He says, okay, I want you to follow me. And he walked me out of this office in this building, and literally on the same floor in the office next door, he walked me into this other office because he wanted to introduce me to someone who could potentially give me a job. And I walked in, and there was a woman I went to college with standing there. And she turns around and she like greets me, and she's all excited. And she's with a friend of hers. And her friend, his mother, ended up leaving Paris for 3 months to go visit his sister. And her apartment was empty in one of the best places in Paris. And he goes, you can stay at my mom's place. And I ended up getting a job with this other guy. And it's like everything worked out. I literally had been on the ground for like 3 hours.
It's amazing. And
everything just fell into place. I had a place to stay. I had a group of friends. I had a little bit of extra money in my pocket. I had a job. I mean, it was awesome. And I was like, this is the best thing ever.
Yeah.
And so I started replicating that experience. I didn't have as many coincidences in other places as I had in Paris, but that sort of set the bar for what it's like to just take a chance like that. And you realize that it's not really, when you listen to your heart and you take action, you're not really taking a risk. It's actually riskier to do the expected thing. The safest action we can take is actually moving in the direction of the unknown. And that was a really big lesson for me.
I love that. When you listen to your heart and you take action, you're not really taking a risk.
Right.
Oh, so good. So, Light, tell us I want to know about your Shine events. I'm coming to one soon now that I am up here in LA. I know you do them in New York and LA, yeah?
So right now they're in New York and LA. We're actually expanding to London and to Nairobi and to a few other places, Toronto. It's really exciting what's happening. You know, I stopped drinking alcohol when I was 26 years old. I'm 44 now. And I never had a problem with alcohol, so it wasn't based on that. I just decided, when you start getting into health and nutrition, and I was getting into vegetarianism, you start looking at everything. And I just couldn't justify poisoning my body with alcohol anymore. It just didn't make any sense. I'm not making better choices. I'm not feeling like a better version of myself. I'm waking up tired, headachy, hungover. I'm relying on this thing to have a good time. I can't have a good time without this thing. Is that what's happening? I'm a slave basically to these liquids. So it just didn't make a lot of sense. And I just decided to, before judging it, as a good or bad thing, I said, let me experiment with not drinking it for a while. If I miss it, I'll just start drinking it again. No big deal. A little glass of wine here and there never hurt anybody. But if I don't miss it, then maybe I would have liberated myself from this thing that I used to believe I needed in order to feel connected or feel like I was having a good time. And so I literally gave myself about a year to wean off of it. And I went from, drinking maybe a few glasses of wine a week to maybe one glass of wine a week to maybe no wine, no cocktails, no beers, and just kind of really slowly wean myself off. And then I realized it wasn't even really the alcohol that I was needing. It was having something in my hand. When I walked into a social setting, you feel a little bit of anxiety because you don't know anybody or people are kind of cliquish or whatever. And I think we all have that feeling. So people use it as a way of kind of having a purpose when you walk into a place. Let's just go to the bar and stand at the bar and we'll get a drink. right? And that's your sort of purpose walking in, because you don't want to just walk in and just stand there and you're already thinking everybody's looking at you or preoccupied with what you're doing or not doing. And then you realize no one even cares.
Right.
No one probably even notices that you're there. And so I started to just order non-alcoholic drinks. And then it got to the point where I just got water. And then I got to the point where I said, you know what? I'm going to go in here. I'm not even going to go to the bar. I'm not even going to get any water. And then I noticed I was holding my keys in my hand. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to just not hold anything in my hand. And then I noticed I put my hands in my pocket. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to stand here with my hands outside my pocket. And I'm just going to be here now. And then I noticed I was the only sober person in a room full of drunk people. And then I stopped going out to bars. Because it was no fun.
It's so not fun. I also, in the last couple of years, last several years, I just don't drink, like you said, glass of wine here and there. I never hurt anyone, but even that lately, it's just not even worth it. I can barely even finish a whole entire glass of wine.
Right.
And I haven't really been around drunk people in a really long time.
Right.
And I remember the last few times being like, how did I used to do this? Like all the time, and let alone be that person. Like what was happening? And so again, no judgment, but just like not an environment, not a place. And so how did this inspire your Shine events?
Oh, so bringing it back around. So then, when you're not going out to bars and lounges, I mean, so much of our culture is centered around alcohol. We don't even realize how much of it is. Watching the football, games, and, people showing up. If you go to any party as an adult, what are you expected to do? Bring a bottle of wine, bring some kind of alcohol, right? It's very unusual to show up at a party for adults and there's no alcohol. So I wasn't really going out a lot. And, I was isolated a lot, but I didn't necessarily feel distressed as a result of it. I just, I think it's natural to want community. It's natural to want to surround yourself with people or connect with people who are doing the things that you're doing, which is why, the Alcoholic Anonymous organizations have gained so much traction, is because people want to feel like they're part of something. And also meditation is picking up all this traction. So I felt like it was time to bring all of those things together, an adult social experience that didn't involve alcohol and that replaced the buzz that you would get from alcohol with meditation, right? Because there's this preconceived notion that you can only meditate at an altar or in your house or in a yoga class. What about meditating before you party? What about meditating before you go to hear comedy? Because that's how I used to experience meditation. For those 15 years, I would meditate in parking garages, movie theaters, concerts, airplanes. I mean, there's no limits to where I could meditate. And so that was just my norm, my status quo. And I wanted to start to kind of create an environment where that could also become a status quo. Like, what's wrong with meditating before you get entertained or before you dance or whatever? So that was sort of the impetus behind the Shine. Now, to give credit to, I have a couple friends who started up a similar event in Australia, and I got a chance to kind of stand on the sidelines and watch those guys grow their event, and it got a lot of traction down in Sydney, and I was very inspired. So I saw that it was possible, and for a second I considered just kind of co-opting their brand, bringing it over to the States. But then I don't know, I'd never gotten a chance to attend personally, and I just thought, let me just start my own thing here and start it really small and just kind of put a lot of care, nurture into it, and see if anything happens with it. If people are interested in it, it'll grow. And we're over 3 years now. We're getting a few hundred people coming to our events. It's purposefully kept kind of small and intimate because I think that it's nicer to walk into a space where you don't feel that overwhelmed by the number of people in there, and you can feel more like a family. So that's been a really cool thing to do. It's kind of like my community service. In fact, we're a nonprofit at this point. So no one's making money off of it. And one of the best things about it is we get to give away money. We sell the tickets for $30 each, and that gives us just enough money to pay for the venue, to pay for the food, to pay for the guy filming it, and use the rest of it, which is usually we budget to be around $400, to give to someone randomly from the audience. Literally,
cool.
we pull somebody out of the audience and we say, here's $400 in cash, and we literally hand it to them in cash. So they can run off and do whatever they want with it, right? And we read this mission statement. Your mission is to use this $400 in any way that inspires you to help other people.
Oh, cool.
And come back and tell us what you did. You can start another Shine movement of your own. You can go and feed the homeless. You can do whatever you want, right? And so in that sense, it's not only just a way to entertain, but it's also an incubator for inspiration. And it's really about empowering other people, because it's not just the person who won it, it's everybody who's witnessing that. Everyone sitting in that audience has a couple $100 at least in their account that maybe they were going to use for some personal need, or going on vacation or getting a new television or whatever. But what if you use that money to help people? You could change lives you could do some serious positive good with a few $100s. And that's what's been demonstrated, because the people who won previously, they come back, we make a little video of what they did, and we show that video. And people are just always so inspired by the reach and the breadth of how people can spend $400 and how many people that can be affected by that.
This is cool. It relates to, and we'll put links to this in the show notes. This is episode number 187. So for anyone listening, you can go to untameyourself.com/episode -187. We're going to put links to Light's own website, to the Shine website, so you can check out the events. But also we had a podcast episode a couple months back now with my friend Sean Croxton, and we were talking about all the great things that we can do with our money. For people who have beliefs that like rich people are assholes, or like money makes people bad, or whatever. It's like, I love this. I love to hear the proof and the stories of people going, and it only takes a couple $100s. I think so many people think in order to do something or make a difference or a change, they need so much more than they actually have. But it's like, not really. So thank you. Thank you for giving us proof of that. Thank you for sharing the science, the meditation, your cool stories. This was super, super fun. So anywhere else that you want people, your websites, your social media, The Bliss More, you have a book coming up. When does it come out officially?
It comes out in January 23rd. So you can go to Amazon or wherever you buy books, and you can pre-order the book. Also, blissmore.co without the M is the website. So you can go there and you can see what's going on with the new book, which is going to be basically encapsulating the principles of what I've been practicing in meditation over the last 15 years and making it accessible to people who can't afford to come and sit with me and learn how to meditate in person.
That's great.
So you can still learn how to meditate and get your meditation game up to 100.
Awesome. So congratulations on the book. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Everyone else listening, as always, find me on Facebook, find me on Instagram. Let me know what you thought about the episode. Light, thank you so much. And absolutely. I will likely see you soon at one of your events.
You. Perfect. You can come as our guest. Take care.
Yay.
One of the biggest things that people say constantly is they'll say, "How are you?" And it doesn't matter if they're your best friend or a person you've never met who happens to know who you are in your story. Like, "How are you?" And you're like, "I'm good. Pretty good today." And they're like, "No, but how are you?" Like the dentist lady scheduling my appointment last Tuesday. I don't know you. I've never met you before in my life. "How are you?" "Pretty good. I just got my teeth checked. All good. No cavities. A+. "No, how are you?" Are we doing this right here? Like, we're scheduling an appointment,
Yeah.
But that's a constant thing. And in the beginning, particularly when you're fresh in grief, you don't even know the answer to that question. You spend all day going, "How am I? Am I okay? Am I going crazy? I'm horrible." You don't want to hear about how horrible I am. Can I tell you how horrible I feel?
Yeah.